All right, we're plugged in, ready to go. Get our levels adjusted, get our microphone set, and I think everything is working. We've got the audio, and we are live for a Panther-Lair Show here on a Tuesday night, June 29th, 2021. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. You should know that website. I think if you're on this podcast, if you're visiting us right now, you should know that website. That shouldn't be a mystery to you. You should be well aware of it, and hopefully you're checking it out. You've been following along this month, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. You're going to find everything there: football, basketball, recruiting. You find it all at Panther-Lair.com. And of course, message boards, where news breaks on the message boards, conversation happens on the message boards, insight, analysis, differing opinions, certainly plenty of those, but just a lot of activity and a lot of interaction with other Pitt fans. I mean, if you're a Pitt fan, I always say this, and I think it applies to all fandom. I think there are two things you like to do the most if you have a favorite team. One is watch that favorite team, and the other is talk about your favorite team. I think those are the two things that fans like to do the most, and that's what you get to do at Panther-Lair.com. I mean, you can't watch the team at Panther-Lair.com, but you can talk to other Pitt fans at Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. I think it's the best online community of Pitt fans that you're going to find. It's not always agreeable. It's not always pleasant. It's not always cherries and roses, as it were. But it is a group of really passionate Pitt fans who want to talk about Pitt sports all the time, and that's what they're able to do on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. Message boards get a bad rap. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But I think there's a lot of good in there because it's conversation, it's an opportunity to talk to other Pitt fans about Pitt sports, and there's certainly been plenty to talk about over the last month. I mean, as we sit here one day before the end of the month, I think when the audio podcast gets released on Wednesday, June 30th, that's the final day of the month, we're going to all take a deep breath, and we sort of are taking it. That's what tonight's podcast is. It's the deep breath and saying, what a month that was. Because it's been, and you'll forgive me for being a broken record on this because I've said it multiple times here on the Panther-Lair Show. I've said it multiple times on the Panthers Insider Show, the radio program we do every Saturday morning at 8 a.m. on 93.7 The Fan. I've written about it in the 321 column on Panther-Lair.com. I'm sure I'll probably write about it again this week. This month has been wild. And wild mostly in comparison to last year, but it's been wild in the way that June's should be. It's not necessarily the craziest June I've ever seen, although at times it has felt like June on steroids. June is always a big recruiting month. June is always an active recruiting month, but it's felt enhanced a little bit this year. But I'm not sure if that's, kind of proven out by the numbers. I mean, they got 10 commitments this month, which is a lot. I don't necessarily know if it's more than you see in most Junes. I mean, I think 2 years ago or 3 years ago, the first time they hosted official visits in June, the Father's Day Massacre, I think they got 9 commitments that weekend. And that was just one weekend. Here they've gotten 10 commitments in the month, and really over a span of about 16 days, from June 12th through yesterday, June 28th. So the numbers aren't necessarily crazier than we've seen in most years. I think they've had more official visits. I'd have to go back and look at the numbers from the last couple of years when they've had June official visits, but they had 29 this year, which seems like a lot, but it was spread over 3 weekends, whereas in the past, I think, they had a lot of visitors, but they maybe only did 2 official visit weekends. Anyway, we'll get into the numbers in a little bit. More or less, the numbers are in line with what you see in most Junes. The difference is that it didn't happen last year, and that, I think, has made this year feel amplified. It's made it feel like this year the recruiting was turned up to 11 in June, and I'm all for it. I think it definitely was on the basketball front. I mean, I was just doing some counting. I think we're close to 20 recruits who visited Pitt basketball this month. I was looking back. I think we wrote 15, 16 articles on those guys, maybe more. Just tracking all those recruits down. They got a commitment, obviously, in June of Mintz, and we talked about him. But I think there's been a lot more recruiting action. And I think, a big part of that for Jeff Caples is because bringing kids to campus for visits it's a strength for Caples. I think getting in a room with Jeff Caples can go a long way. And I'm not going to, use that to entirely dismiss the 2021 recruiting class, the guys who were coming in as freshmen. I think there are good players in there. I'm not going to bash that class or anything. I think they got some good guys who are going to help them. But they obviously missed on some guys. They missed on some targets. And I think part of it was not being able to get that face-to-face interaction. Bring a kid to Pittsburgh. Sit down with him in the coach's office. Show him around the facility. Show him the Cathedral of Learning. Show him Oakland. We all take these things for granted sometimes, I think. But it can make a real impression the first time you see the Cathedral of Learning. I talked to a recruit who visited on Monday, and he said, they showed me the Falcons, the peregrine falcons that are up there. Not just on the live stream camera. He actually went and saw the nest, I guess, from high up on the cathedral. That can make an impact. Talked to a recruit who visited today and said the classrooms, the nationality rooms really stood out to him. We forget the kind of impact that these things can make, the kind of impact that these things can have when you actually see them in person. And Pat Narduzzi and his staff, I think, did a good job recruiting without that element last year. I think it hurt Jeff Capel, or made it more difficult for Jeff Capel, because he didn't maybe have some of the success that Narduzzi has had. Narduzzi recruiting that last year's class, still the ACC Coastal Division Championship was somewhat fresh in their minds. They had a little bit of success. They had more success in the basketball program, and I think that helped propel them a little bit. They're a little more established. They have a little more stability. I think that helped them in the 2021 recruiting class. But for Jeff Capel, it's still, a lot of it is still coming down to him selling the program and selling himself and selling his commitment to recruits. And there's only so much you can do over Zoom. I mean, like, you and I are sitting here on this live stream. We're looking at each other. I'm talking. You're watching this, or you're listening to this. Do you feel like we're connecting right now? You're listening to this audio podcast, which would be roughly the equivalent of being on a phone call, a one-way phone call at least. Do you feel like we're connecting right now? A little bit. You might feel like you know me. You can't see what that picture is. It's a pretty sweet picture. But you can't see it. You can't, you don't really, we're not in person. You don't know how tall I am. You can't look in my eyes. I can't look in your eyes. We can't have that kind of personal connection. And that's how recruiting was for the last year and a half. Is just like we're doing right now, except it was, two-way instead of, sort of one-sided like this conversation. And that's tough to do. It's tough to build those relationships. It's tough to build those connections when you're recruiting like that, particularly when you don't. And then it becomes really tough to sell recruits when you don't have that success to sort of back up your claims about what you're doing with the program. But you get the guys to Oakland, you get them to the Peterson Event Center, you sit down with them in the office, you show them all the things you're doing in the Peterson Event Center, and you sit down with them in the office. You talk about what you're doing, you talk about what you're building, you talk about what you're going to do for every player on your roster and how you're going to take care of them. And you can build those connections. You can build those relationships, and you can make those connections. And I think that's, Jeff Capel has hit the ground running this month. He got one commitment, but I think made some progress from some guys in the 2022 recruiting class, and then really laid some important groundwork with some guys in the 2023 recruiting class. Two guys from that 23 class visited this week, one on Monday, one on Tuesday, both named Jalen, incidentally. Weird, right? Both got offers, and both left with a really strong, favorable impression of the University of Pittsburgh, of Jeff Capel, of the Pitt basketball program. I think it's really important. This month has been really important for Jeff Capel. Getting these in-person visits has been really important for Jeff Capel. He is an engaging figure. I think he is the kind of guy that you can connect with when you speak to him in person. I think when you watch press conferences, you interact with him in those kinds of settings, and I think you can see how he could make his case and sell really well to a recruit. And not sell in sort of a cheap sales way, but you understand what I'm saying. The recruiting process ultimately is sales. But you can see how he could be successful in that sort of environment. Now he's got an opportunity to do it. And I think they've made the most of it, or made a lot of it at least, over the course of the last 4 weeks. And it's been impressive to see who Pitt has brought to campus for visits, and some of the progress they've made with those guys, I think really laying some important groundwork. Now, the key is going to be, as always, what happens in the winter when Pitt basketball is on the court, and if they can show some steps forward, show some progress, Key guys like Femi Odikali and Ethiel Horton and Nike Sabani and Will Jefferson, John Hughley. All these guys taking big steps forward this season. It's going to have as much of an impact as, Jeff Caples' one-on-one meetings with recruits in June. But I think you put those two elements together. You put the connections that were made in those one-on-one meetings in June, and you put that together with some success on the court, which, remains to be seen what kind of success they can have. And you got an opportunity to build, I think, a really strong recruiting class, which obviously is going to carry over and give you an opportunity to win more games in the future. So a big month for Jeff Capel, no question about it. And we'll take your comments and questions on that if you want to throw them there in the live chat, the chat screen there on the live stream. But obviously a lot of the focus is on football. Like I said, 29 official visits this month that we've confirmed. I can't guarantee that the Pitt coaching staff didn't sneak a couple other guys in there. We didn't know about Cole Mitchell, the tight end, who we're going to talk about quite a bit here. We didn't know about him until late in the official visit weekend, kind of confirmed that, I think on Sunday. He had been there since Friday, so sloppy job by us to miss that. But, you get 28 out of 29 heading into that last, out of the official visit weekends. You say you did a pretty good job. You just like to get 29 out of 29. But anyway, 29 official visitors. They got commitments from, I think, 10 of those guys, which is a pretty good haul. A few of those 29, a few of the remaining. What do you think? Yeah, a few of the remaining official visitors, a few of the other 19. Committed to other schools. It leaves about 15 or 16 guys uncommitted. A few of those are not going to be takes for Pitt. They don't have committable offers for Pitt due to positions filling up or just reevaluations by the staff or what have you. There's a few guys that are going to be committing in the next couple weeks that we're going to be keeping an eye on. And then there's a few guys that we're just sort of seeing what happens. So let's look at who they got. All right, and we'll start kind of most recently because we, of course, went live for a special recruiting reaction podcast on Sunday night to talk about the big weekend of commitments. And since then, we sort of speculated about one commitment and then, ultimately confirmed it after we were done with the live stream. And then picked out another commitment on Monday, which was actually yesterday. It feels like it was a week ago because that's just how this week is going. Let's talk about those two most recent guys because we haven't talked about them yet. Monday's commitment, Isaiah Montgomery, an offensive lineman from Virginia. And, we rate him as a 3-star guard prospect. He's played mostly tackle in high school. I think he's the kind of guy, he's like 6'5", 285, 290, right around there. He's the kind of guy who could come into college and get to Pitt, start off at tackle, and potentially move inside to guard. You've seen this coaching staff largely, mostly take bigger offensive linemen and they'll play tackle or they'll move inside to guard. They're willing to take big tackles and play them inside at guard. Gabe Hoy has played inside at guard. Matt Gonsalves has gotten reps at guard. Liam Dick, before he transferred, moved inside to guard. Keldrick Wilson, the graduate transfer from Hampton, who's a big guy. He's built like a tackle. He's tall like a tackle. He has played guard. They want size. They want big offensive linemen on this team, and Isaiah Montgomery is a guy who could play tackle or move inside to offensive guard. This is a really big score for Pitt. Big, I think just a big get. We know they need offensive linemen. You always need offensive linemen. We talked on Sunday about Jakavian Nonar, the big offensive tackle from Florida. We'll talk about him in a second. He visited over the weekend and committed. We broke him down a little bit on Sunday night. We'll get back to him. But they needed another guy, and ideally a slightly more proven offensive lineman than Nonar, and I think that's what Montgomery is. Offer sheet's impressive. Arizona State, Boston College, Florida State, Illinois, Indiana, Maryland, Michigan State, NC State, Tennessee, Virginia, Virginia Tech, West Virginia. I would say almost all of those offers were legit committable offers. And I think he's a big-time offensive line prospect, the kind of guy that they need to get sort of year after year, and they need to get a bunch of these kinds of guys. I think last year's haul with Terrence Rankle, who apparently now is going by Terrence Moore, and Terrence Enos, I think those were a couple of good offensive linemen. I like the kid Kyle Fugetti from Michigan, guy who's a hockey player. How many times you see offensive linemen who are hockey players as well? I guess that's what you get when you recruit kids out of Michigan. I think those are some good line prospects, in addition to a guy who's kind of raw, and Trey Anderson. You remember his backstory. Went on a mission for a couple of years. Now he's back into the game, and he was a tight end. He's going to play offensive tackle. That's a project. Even though he's a couple of years older than everyone else, is going to be a freshman this year. But Enos and Terrence Moore, I think, are really good line prospects. You look at the year before that, Michael Statham and Branson Taylor. Taylor has already gotten on the field. I think he's going to be a really good tackle for this team. Michael Statham, jury's still kind of out. Matt Gonsalves the year before, that's a guy who I think is going to be a really good tackle on this team. They've signed some good offensive line recruiting classes in the last few years. Probably the one thing they've lacked, and this is, I talk about conversations on Panther-Lair.com, this is a big one, they've lacked quantity. They got Statham and Taylor, looked good. Those were the only guys. Last year they got a few more guys, but again, there's some, Trey Anderson's sort of that raw guy that you're going to have to coach up to be an offensive tackle. This year they've got 2 commitments already. Got to think they take one more offensive lineman. Not sure if they have room to take much more than that, but you do every now and then need to have one of those big classes like they had in 2017 when they took 5 offensive linemen. They took Gabe Hoy, and they took Carter Warren, and they took Owen Drexel, and they took Carson Van Lin. And there was one other in that 17 class, and I'm drawing a blank on who it was. Who was that other offensive lineman? I could look it up. I'm not going to. But they took like 5 offensive linemen in the class. And Jerry Drake. Jerry Drake was the other guy. I knew it was a guy who had like really good offers and seemed to be even a little underrated as like a high-end 3-star prospect. But every now and then you need one of those big number classes, particularly if you're Pitt, where you're not really you're not getting the elite of the elite blue chip offensive line prospects who have a higher hit rate. You're taking guys who, I don't want to say they're a crapshoot or they're half and half or whatever it is, but you're going to need to develop them well. And not all the guys that you need to develop well are going to pan out the way you would like them to. So every now and then, juicing up on numbers is something you're going to need to do. I don't know if they're going to have room to do it this year, but with Nonar, they got a raw offensive tackle prospect, a guy who's an outstanding basketball player, played football for 1 year, but shows a ton of upside, and if he really works at it, I think can be really, really good. And then Isaiah Montgomery, a guy, like I said, who can play tackle, can move inside to guard. Again, a really good-looking offensive line prospect. So thought that was a good score. He visited Pitt, I think, on the second official visit weekend, went and took another visit, I think, to Illinois, and then ended up committing to Pitt on Monday. Before that was Sunday night, and we talked about it on the podcast. We talked about it on the live stream. Cole Mitchell, tight end from Frederick, Maryland, Linganore High School. And we talked about his story a little bit because he's a guy who took his official visit to Pitt this past weekend, committed on Sunday, never really announced it himself. I think he might have posted on Instagram or something. He's not real active on social media. I think his last tweet was from like 2019 or something like that. We ultimately got his coach on the phone, and he confirmed that he had committed, and that was sort of how we got on top of that story. But his backstory is far more interesting because he's a guy who was in the 2021 recruiting class, wasn't getting the recruiting interest that he was looking for. And so he was going to go to IMG Academy in Bradenton, Florida, and do a post-grad year, a prep school year, basically, and be a recruit in the 2022 recruiting class, hoping that the increased exposure of playing at IMG would lead to more recruiting interest and get him better opportunities at the next level. So that was the plan. He goes to Pitt's prospect camp this past week, 2 weeks ago, impresses the coaches, gets an offer a few days later, takes the official visit and commits and decides he's going to join Pitt as a 2021 recruit, which means he's moving in this summer. He's going to be in training camp in August, and he's going to be on the team in the fall. It's kind of a unique situation. Doesn't always happen. You don't always see that happening. But the past year has been unique, right? So the backstory on Cole Mitchell, and this is like 6'5", 235-pound tight end, plays both ways at Linganore, plays defensive end and tight end, also plays basketball. He's an outstanding basketball player. His coach told me he's out there tomahawk dunking. So, big guy who can move really well, really physical guy. His coach said he's violent. They're sort of a run-heavy offense. They throw it a little bit, but not a ton to Cole Mitchell. But he's out there blocking and just destroying guys as a blocking tight end, which this team could certainly use. It's probably one of the things we don't talk about often enough when it comes to the running game is the blocking at tight end. I mean, we talk about the offensive line all the time, rightfully so, but they also haven't had great blocking tight ends in the last few years either. Maybe going back to 2017, somewhere around there. Somebody just started buzzing across the room. I'm not really sure what it is. Hopefully that doesn't come through on the podcast, but if it does, hey, ambient sound. So really good blocker. Backstory, though, on Cole Mitchell. Junior year of high school. Important year, right? I mean, this is a year where guys have to really kind of make their name, put out great film, and really get on the recruiting radar. Well, he was recovering from mono. And because of that, he didn't really have the stamina to play both ways the way, he would normally have done. The coaches needed him more on defense, so he mostly got his playing time at defensive end. So he doesn't have great tight end tape. He doesn't have great offensive tape from his junior year. No matter. He'll go into the summer before his senior year, and he'll go to prospect camps, and he'll impress coaches, and he'll earn his offers that way. Wah, wah. You know what happened there. NCAA dead period due to COVID, no prospect camps. A guy like Cole Mitchell never gets that opportunity to go out on the road and work out in front of coaches in person. It's okay. He'll have his senior year. He'll get filmed then, get an opportunity late, close to signing day. Wah, wah, again. Maryland doesn't have football in the fall in 2020. They pushed the season back to the spring. So that means that Cole Mitchell doesn't have any senior film. He doesn't have any senior games until after signing day in February, after the second signing day. So here's a guy who really had very little tape playing tight end as a junior in high school, didn't get a chance to go to any prospect camps prior to his senior season, and then had no senior film whatsoever because he had no senior games whatsoever prior to signing day. This is how a guy like him, who looks like a legitimate Power 5 prospect, ends up still available in the summer after his senior year of high school. This is why he was going to IMG Academy. But fortunately for Pitt, he went to their prospect camp first. And when he did, he impressed them. He had a good camp. And they offered him a scholarship and got him. I don't know what Cole Mitchell's going to become. I'm sort of the mind that, the blue chip guys, the really elite guys, they're going to get found. They're going, if you're really elite, no matter the circumstances, they're going to find you. So Cole Mitchell's probably not in that category. I don't know if he's going to become an all-conference player. I don't know if he's going to become a starter. I don't know what his career is going to be. But there's a lot to like. The size at 6'5", 230, the athleticism of a guy who plays basketball, physicality of a guy who just kills people on the field, and can catch, pretty decent hands, and he'll get better at that. Already built really well, gonna get bigger, gonna get stronger in a college strength program. Overall, there's very little to dislike with landing a commitment from Cole Mitchell, I think, particularly at this stage in the process where they had another scholarship to give, at least one. Barring, pending more attrition, if more were to come, I think that's a pretty good late pickup in the 2021 recruiting class. And now they end up with 3 tight ends in that class, along with Jake Renda and what's his name, Gavin Bartholomew. So pretty solid tight end class, I think. It's sort of reminiscent, at least in terms of recruits, of the 2017 class that had Grant Kerrigan and Charles Reeves and Tyler Sear. But I'd say that, granted, we're biased by what we've seen from Reeves and Kerrigan and Sear, where Kerrigan's the only guy still on the team, and he spends half his time playing offensive tackle. I don't know if he's ever caught a pass in his Pitt career. We're biased by what their careers have become. But this group looks better, I think, with Renda and Bartholomew and now Mitchell added into it. I like this group of tight ends. They might actually, this is crazy stuff to say, okay? So don't hold it against me if it ends up being wrong, because I know I'm getting a little wild. Hey, man, it's almost 9 o'clock at night. We're getting a little loopy out here. They look like they're building up some pretty solid depth and quality in the tight end room at Pitt. I know. I'm shocked by it, too. I can't believe it either. All right, let's get out to some questions and comments. Chat screen still being weird here on YouTube. I don't know what is going on with YouTube. Let's jump in here with some comments and questions. All right, Michael B., one of our super chatters, contributed to the podcast, and we really appreciate you. I'm going to get to your question first. Hi, Chris. Sorry I missed last week. It's okay, Mike. We missed you, but it's glad you're back. Question for you. What did you think about Jeff Caples' tweet? I actually found it immature, and it reminded me of what a player would tweet if he felt disrespected. He needs to coach better. I'm guessing you're talking about Jeff Capel tweeting a quote about, you saw me tearing down a house, and I was only building it back up. I don't even know if I want to... Here, I'll find it so I can read it. I think I know the tweet you're talking about. I try not to spend too much time. Oh, here. I think this is the tweet you're talking about. It's a quote. It's an image that he tweeted, and it says, "People left when the house was falling apart, not knowing I was tearing it down to build a mansion. I just wanted to see who was going to grab a hammer." A hammer. Sounded like it said hamburger. I mean, whatever. You know, I saw this. Somebody else tweeted this. You know, Cable didn't come up with that. Like, I saw this image somewhere else, and maybe it was in my imagination, but I saw somebody else, probably another like an NBA player or something like that, or an NFL player. Or, I don't know. I follow a lot of people on Twitter. Somebody else tweeted this quote, and I think Jeff grabbed it and said he liked it. And see, I guess he liked it and tweeted it himself. I mean, I don't know. Whatever. I mean, Capel. I don't know. Honestly, I don't have much to say about it. I like immature, whatever. I don't know. I mean, I hear what he's saying. I mean, what he's saying does describe the situation at Pitt, right? People left when the house was falling apart, not knowing I was tearing it down to build a mansion. Just wanted to see who was going to grab a hammer. I don't know. Is he talking about players who have left? Is he talking about fans who jumped off the bandwagon? I don't know. And quite frankly, I don't care. I don't get caught up too much in what people tweet. I mean, there are some things that are ill-advised. Some things that I say, I probably would have stayed away from that, or you probably could have read the room a little bit better, or, this or that. But I don't know. I just can't, I don't get too worked up about that kind of thing. It's just not, I don't know. It just doesn't do anything for me. I mean, like, you know what I'm looking at with Jeff Capel right now? So he tweeted that on June 24th. So that was, last week? I'm looking at Jeff Capel getting 20 recruits to visit this month, getting a commitment from a 4-star prospect, laying the groundwork with a lot of 2023 recruits, making some progress with some guys in the 2022 class. This is what's interesting to me. You know what I mean? Whatever Jeff Capel tweets, he tweets a lot of things. Capel's active on Twitter. Good for him. I'm going to call the recruits that he gets on campus for visits and see what they think about him. And I'm not going to ask them about this quote because it's Twitter, man. It's Twitter. It doesn't change my opinion of Capel or the job he's doing one bit. It doesn't affect how I, how I form opinions on the performance at Pitt. I want to see what recruits he gets and I want to see what games he wins. It's kind of what it comes down to for me. All right, a couple questions here to start things off about the quarterback situation. Angry Dolphins 71. Hi, Chris. Could you address the quarterback recruiting problem? Is it problematic that quarterbacks don't even seem to be visiting, let alone committing? And Roman, one of our longtime fans of the podcast, and I think I always say that about you, Roman, because I don't know how to pronounce your last name, so I'm not going to butcher it. I'm just going to say Roman, one of our OGs here on the podcast. Hey, Chris, you and Jim have been hinting lately at what you think is going to happen with the quarterback room next year. Any chance you elaborate tonight based on the spring game? Yellen is the odd man out. So, the quarterback situation, it's weird. And this is sort of off the top of my head. I'm going to write about this in the 321 column this week. And, you'll get more of my insight or perspective on it then, I guess, when I've sort of collected my thoughts a little bit more. I've been thinking about it here and there, trying to figure out what I think about the quarterback situation. And I'll say all of this with the caveat that this could change tomorrow. Wednesday I could release the podcast and we could see a new quarterback offer go out in the class of 2022 an hour later. 10 minutes later, the moment I release the podcast, before I even publish it, there could be a new quarterback offer that goes out. But as I look at the situation right now, what's most curious to me, and I could be wrong about this, but what's most curious to me in my perception of the situation is that they don't really seem to be recruiting anyone. They don't really seem to be working all that hard on any recruits in the 2022, any quarterbacks in the 2022 recruiting class. I just don't see the activity. And I mean, who asked the question? Angry Dolphin 71, asks, says about, it doesn't seem like quarterbacks even seem to be visiting. No quarterbacks visited, other than some guys who came to camp. They had a 2023 prospect who came to camp. He has an offer from Pitt. Looked pretty good. William Watson, a kid out of Massachusetts. I think, has an upside of a high 3-star, maybe even a low 4-star prospect. A little bit shorter, but throws the ball really well. Can run a little bit too. I like him. And Mark Whipple seems to like him a lot as well. But they didn't have anybody visit. 2022 quarterback prospects didn't come to camp. I mean, guys did come to camp, but nobody with an offer came to camp, and they didn't come visit Pitt. And I don't think it's because they're all just saying no. I just don't see. We try to track down guys here and there, and I don't really see who they're going after. And maybe we're just not finding the right guys. Maybe we're not reaching out to the right people. I think they would like a quarterback in this class. I can't imagine that they're saying, no, we really don't want anybody in this class. Even though it's going to be a smaller recruiting class, I can't imagine they're just going to punt on it. But I don't see where a lot of the activity is. I don't see where any of the activity is. I don't see where any movement is with quarterback recruits. Now, it's conceivable that the staff could look at it and say, all right, Kenny Pickett for this year, he's gone 22. In 2022, we've got Nick Patty, we've got Davis Bevel, we've got Joey Yellen, we've got Nate Arnell. That's a lot of guys, assuming they all stay. And maybe we get through spring camp and somebody emerges as the starter. Maybe it's one of the younger guys, and one of the older guys like Patty decides to transfer. Maybe that's the case. I don't know. And then they deal with it. But even if you have one guy transfer, you've still got 3 on scholarship coming back. Even if you have 2 guys transfer, you'll have 2 on scholarship coming back, which is not a lot. I mean, you want more than that. But maybe they're looking at it and saying, we've got a lot of numbers, so we don't need to press for a guy right now. I could see the staff doing this. I could see the staff standing pat with what they have right now, currently on the roster, with the guys they've already offered and not really making much movement or much progress there. And then going into the senior season with a list of 10 guys or a dozen guys or 20 guys or whatever that they're really keeping an eye on. And if any of them really jumps out, if any of them really grabs the staff's attention, that maybe they offer midseason or late season, and try and make a run at a guy like they did. You remember Tate Rodemaker a few years ago, make a run at a guy like that. I could see them taking that approach, that they've got some guys they're going to watch, and if any of them really grab them, really grab the staff, then they'll go after them. And if they don't, then they'll pass, and they'll keep an eye on the transfer market. And the transfer market, you don't want to rely on the transfer market for quarterback recruits. You don't want to say, well, it doesn't matter, we'll find a transfer. The reality is, there are a lot of transfers out there, and there are going to be a lot of transfers, particularly at the quarterback position every year. There are going to be guys out there. Now, Pitt might not get Justin Fields or Joe Burrow. They might get more guys like Joey Yellen, or they might get guys like Nate Peterman. You know what I mean? They might get guys like Tom Savage. There are guys out there. There will be guys out there every year that if you have the right situation, you can make the right pitch, you have a chance of landing them, and they can come in and help you sooner rather than later. You don't want to rely on that. But that option is there. And I think it has changed the landscape of quarterback recruiting, both in how you target guys, that whether you push hard for guys or whether you get a little more selective with your high school quarterback prospects, and also how you project your roster down the road. Not that you're always projecting to have a transfer coming in, but with the understanding that you're going to have transfers going out. And at some point, one of these guys we're talking about, Patty, Bevel, Yellen, Yarnell, one of them is going to transfer at some point. At least one, if not more. They're going to go. And I think that's just sort of a fact of life in college football right now. That's going to happen. So you have to take that into account. And I guess someone would say, well, yeah, you have to take that into account. That's why you need to get a high school guy every year. I would say you have to take that into account and understand that why use a scholarship spot on a quarterback that you're not entirely sold on when you know you have maybe, I don't know, whatever, 50-50 chance of holding on to these guys over the course of their career. So, I mean, I don't know. It's a tricky situation. I do think that it's possible that they're looking at it like we've got 4 scholarship quarterbacks coming back in 2022. That's a lot. We're not going to be able to keep that whole group together, and especially not if we add a 5th guy into the mix. So we're only going to go get that other guy if we're really sold on someone. But again, Mark Whipple could look at tape tomorrow and say, hey, man, I like this guy. Let's offer him. Let's push hard for him. Let's get him. So it's a tricky situation to figure out. To Roman's question about, what the room looks like in 2022 or what the depth chart looks like. I mean, I've said I think Davis Bevell has the highest ceiling out of all the quarterbacks on the roster. I haven't seen a whole lot of Nate Yarnell, but I think Davis Bevell, based on what we saw out of him in high school and then what we saw of him, quite frankly, what we saw out of him in the spring game, looks like he has the highest ceiling because of his size. He can run a little bit. He's got a good arm. I think Nick Patty's interesting. I'm not sure if he is I don't know if Pitt will have him as a starting quarterback or not, but there's a role for him potentially. He was doing all this goal line stuff at Florida State last year. But I don't know. I mean, that's all going to be determined in the spring when you see how those guys perform and who kind of emerges as a top guy. Coaster King, saw Travius Lathan is committing soon. Does he still look like a West Virginia lean? I'm not sure. I haven't really followed up with him since his Pitt official visit. Linebacker prospect, really good recruit. Did look like he was leaning toward West Virginia after his official visit to Morgantown. We'll see. I mean, Pitt impressed him. They did a good job on the official visit. They just got to remind him of how much he enjoyed his official visit there. Coaster King also says, this is the last show before the Tyrese Fearbry decision. What's your final prediction? Yeah, Tyrese Fearbry set to commit on July 4th. That's what, Sunday? Is that what it is? Today's the 29th, 30th, 1, 2, 3, 4. Sunday. 4-star defensive end from Perry. It's going to be Pitt or Penn State. Can I predict that? Does that count? Probably not, right? I guess, gun to my head, I would predict Pitt. I just think he's got connections and relationships there. He's got family there. He's got a great connection with Corey Sanders and Charlie Partridge. He's got a comfort level around Pitt that I can't see him having at any other school. Now, Penn State did a great job. They impressed him. They made him feel like he wants to get out of Pittsburgh and get out of the city and go live in State College. We'll see if he's changed his mind about that over the last couple of weeks. I don't know. We'll see. I guess if I have to make a prediction, I would say Pitt, but that's not I don't know if it's 51-49, but it's not much better than that. Josh Newark says, what's the shirt? Oh, my shirt. I have RX Brewing. Repping them tonight. Great place out in Emsworth, gluten-free brewery. Make a great hazy IPA. The blonde ale is really good. They've got some special stuff they do every now and then. A strawberry milkshake IPA. It's outstanding. I think it was strawberry. It's some kind of milkshake IPA. It's just great beer, and it's gluten-free. So if you need to drink gluten-free beer, you need to have a gluten-free diet, or you are choosing to have a gluten-free diet, but you still want to drink beer because beer is good, RX Brewery out in Emsworth, out on 65. Big fan. Love them. Need to get out there again sometime soon. Josh Newark also says, we all know the pat signals and what they mean. What does googly eyes mean? Listen, I said this on Twitter. I've said it on the message boards. I'll say it to anyone who listens. I am not responsible for other people tweeting googly eyes, okay? It's hard enough for me to try and interpret what teenagers mean when they tweet stuff like that. It's even harder for me to figure out what adults mean when they tweet like that, because the teenagers, I think, at least know what they're trying to say. I'm not sure that the adults even know what they're trying to say when they tweet things like googly eyes. So if you see a googly eye tweet from anyone, whether it's coaches, media, whoever, don't ask me what the googly eyes are about. I don't know why someone would tweet googly eyes. On a basic fundamental level, I don't know why someone would tweet googly eyes. And I really don't know on a very specific level why this person or that person tweeted googly eyes earlier this morning or this afternoon or something like that. I don't know. I can't explain why people tweet googly eyes. A lot of times the coaches will do it when there's some big news coming or something. Ooh, googly eyes. But I can't. I don't know. I don't know if I'm too old or just not with it. Maybe I'm not hip enough. Maybe it's hip to be square. And googly eyes, well, they're not square. They're round. I don't know. I don't know why people tweet googly eyes. All right. Let's scroll down here. See some more questions and comments. Let's see what else other people are talking about. We started having a conversation in the chat kind of without me. You guys are all just chatting away, having a good time. Josh Newark asked about Cole Mitchell. Says, is Cole Mitchell a stretch for Pitt to take, or because we have no tight ends, is this a good pickup? Yeah, kind of like I was saying. I think Cole Mitchell is a good pickup for Pitt. I think I think he fits in well. Particularly, and I didn't really think about it in this context until just now as I was talking about it. If you look at Cole Mitchell not as, well, I shouldn't say not as. If you look at Cole Mitchell as the third tight end in a class, not that he ranks number 3 below the other two or anything like that, but just as the third guy they take in a class. I mean, 3 tight end classes are huge. You don't usually have 3 tight ends in a class. A lot of times you don't have 2 tight ends in a class. If you look at him as the third guy, filling out a 3 tight end class, I think it looks even better because you got a guy who profiles as a Power 5 recruit, and you kind of stole him late in the process when he was really flying under the radar. Not a lot of schools seem to really be aware of him, which I don't think would have been the case a year from now if he went and played a season at IMG. I think he would have been much more well known. I think he would have gone to prospect camps and drawn a lot more attention and all these things. So you kind of stole him late in the recruiting process. And I think, to get a guy like that as your third tight end, I don't see much downside to it at all, to be honest. And we'll see what he does in his career. We'll see if he ever plays. We'll see if he ever produces on the field. But I don't see a lot of downside to it. I think it's a really good pickup, actually. TRR says, how many defensive tackles do you expect in this class? There are 4 juniors at the position, and don't staffs recruit classes based off looking 2 years down the road? Yeah, generally speaking, I think coaches do look kind of 2 or 3 years out is often what I've said, 3 years out. You look down the road, and if you look at the defensive tackle position now, there's really 4 juniors on the roster. Tyler Bentley, Devin Danielson, David Green, and then Noah Palmer is defensive tackle as well. He hasn't really seen the playing time that Bentley and Danielson and Green have seen. Then in the sophomore class, you have DeAndre Jules and Kalijah Cansey. Those are 2 more defensive tackles. And again, those guys with sophomore eligibility plus 1 if they choose to stick around as super seniors. And then I think in the freshman class, you bring in Elliott Donald and Dorian Ford. For right now, I think those guys are defensive tackle prospects. I forget, we disagreed about Elliott Donald in the past, but I think he's going to be a D tackle. We'll see if Dorian Ford sticks on defense. He looks like the kind of guy, and maybe it's just because he's a big defensive tackle from Baldwin that I'm saying this, but he looks like the kind of guy who could have potentially moved to the offensive line at some point in his career. And then Sean Fitzsimmons coming in as a freshman is a defensive tackle prospect. As a guy who's a recruit, he'll be a freshman in 2022. So they've got a little depth there. And I think you can look at the defensive ends. I think a guy like Dallin Hayes could move to defensive tackle at some point in his career. Bam Brema has worked at defensive tackle, which is wild because Bam Brema was a really skinny, raw defensive end. And, has moved back and forth and played both, really. So you've got some numbers there. I think they could take 1 more defensive tackle in this class, along with Sean Fitzsimmons. I'm not sure because they've got 2 defensive line recruits commits already. Fitzsimmons and Jimmy Scott, the defensive end from Buffalo, who committed it, a couple weeks ago. They want to get Tyrese Fearbry, obviously. That would give them another defensive end in the class. I guess they would like another defensive tackle, but it's hard because then you've got 4 scholarships on the defensive line in a small class. And I just don't know if they're going to have the room for that unless a can't-miss guy comes along at defensive tackle. So with Donald and Ford in this last class, Jules and Cansey, and potentially a guy like Deion Hayes and Bam Brima as sophomores, and then Fitzsimmons already in a small class, they might just stand pat with 1 defensive tackle. But again, unless a can't-miss guy comes along and they go for that, I could understand it. But I wouldn't be surprised if they just sit on 1. Mad Dog, XNE, DND, don't know what your name. I'm just going to call you Mad Dog. Maybe I'll call you 2020. Says, what do you think Elliott Donald's role is and Naquan Brown's role is as freshmen? Do you think Elliott has a chance to start his first year? I don't think he'll be a starter. Like I said, I think he'll be a defensive tackle. And whether he's playing end or tackle, I think those spots are going to be largely spoken for, the starting spots. You know what I mean? I think at defensive end, you've got 3 potential starters in Deslin Alexandra, Abakuc Baldonado, and John Morgan. At defensive tackle, you've got Bentley and Danielson and Green and Keyshawn Camp back. That's 4 potential starters there. 4 guys that all have started in their careers. Deslin Alexandra has played defensive tackle and defensive end in his career. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 guys with starting experience at the defensive line positions. I don't think that leaves a lot of room for a freshman to come in and start right off the bat. I don't see that happening. Donald and Brown, honestly, with the talent they have along the defensive line, the depth they have along the defensive line, I wouldn't be surprised to see both of those guys, probably Nakai Johnson and Dorian Ford as well, play 4 games or less in redshirt. I wouldn't be surprised if that's what happened. We'll see. Guys can impress. Maybe the coaches, I wouldn't be surprised if the coaches were moving further away from redshirting guys and doing it less just because things are just, so up in the air anymore that you just take what you got right now and run with it. But, I just think there's a lot of depth on the defensive line. I think there's a lot of talent on the defensive line. They built this group up really well. I know they've got something to prove after losing Rashad Weaver and Patrick Jones, but there's a lot of good players there. And I think they're going to be really good this year. And I don't know if there's a role for a freshman to jump in and play a lot, let alone to start. Bart Simpson says, I've never understood why star quarterbacks don't want to come to Pitt. They're pretty much guaranteed to play as long as they want. I'm guessing it's the lack of star wide receivers. Maybe. I think, who's the last star quarterback that came to Pitt as a high school recruit? Chad Wojcik? Probably. Not counting transfers. Nate Peterman was a former 4-star. Max Brown was a former 5-star. Ricky Down was a former 4-star. He might have been downgraded ultimately to a 3-star. I forget. I mentioned Nate Peterman. Tom Savage was a former 4-star. I guess Davis Bevel was a 4-star recruit. I don't know. I think it's probably overall team success, and there are fewer of those guys. I do think it's been especially hard for Pitt over the last, what year is this, 2021? Over the last 6 years because of the turnover at offensive coordinator. Oh, and Kenny Pickett. No, Kenny Pickett wasn't a 4-star. I think it's been tough because of the turnover at offensive coordinator. You need to build relationships. Quarterbacks tend to recruit earlier in the process, and it's hard to do that without consistency at the offensive coordinator position. You need to build relationships over time so you can get those early commitments. And Pitt, Mark Whipple is now entering his 3rd season. It's the first time Pat Narduzzi's had an offensive coordinator coach 3 seasons. It's the first time Pitt has had an offensive coordinator coach 3 seasons since, I don't even know when. When was the last? I guess Matt Cavanaugh, technically, because even though Paul Chryst was the offensive coordinator, they moved titles around and all this kind of thing. All right, I guess it was Joe. I guess Joe Rudolph was the offensive coordinator in title all 3 years. So I guess since Joe Rudolph. So it's been a long time since they've had that kind of continuity at offensive coordinator, and I think that kind of plays into it as well. You would think that Mark Whipple's system would be attractive for quarterbacks. Save your jokes about running to the sideline. It's old. It's tired. It's not. It was never really that funny, and it really was not the issue that anyone wants to make it out to be. It was by far the least of the problems with Pitt's offense over the last 2 seasons or 3 seasons, or 2 seasons, I guess. But I mean, Mark Whipple's offense should be appealing to quarterback recruits. Throwing the ball all over the place, throwing the ball a million times. You're going to show off your arm strength. You're going to show off your arm talent. You're going to show off your pocket presence. You're going to show off your ability to read defenses. I mean, this is a good system for quarterbacks. But the overall team success and, again, the lack of sort of continuity at the offensive coordinator position, it just doesn't seem to have translated all that much. All right, let's scroll down here. Do you agree with the sentiment that Mark Whipple is among the worst offensive coordinators in all Power 5 football? From the B2B Prof. I am going to claim ignorance on knowing the ins and outs of every offensive coordinator in Power 5 football. It's like 65 or 66 guys. Probably some schools have co-offensive coordinators, so you're pushing 70, 75 guys. That's a lot of offensive coordinators to know and to rank. Is Mark Whipple in the bottom 5 or 10 of those? I don't know. I know that Pitt's offense has been in the bottom 5 or 10 of Power 5 teams in scoring. And so by that standard, yes, Mark Whipple is near the bottom. I don't think Whipple. No, I'm not going to say it the negative way. I'm not going to say I don't think. I think Whipple knows offense. I think Mark Whipple understands offense. I think people who are smarter than me. This is what I always do. All right, I turn to people who are smarter than me and I say, does this make sense, what they just did? And those people will tell me, no, it doesn't make sense because this and this and this. Or yes, it does make sense because of this and this and this. And there are times when Pitt's offense has worked. And people have said, look, this worked because this and this and this. And it was great coaching by Whipple and it set this up. And there have been times where things didn't work. And they would say, this didn't work because this wasn't executed and that wasn't executed. But if it had been executed the way it was designed, it would have gone really well. I don't put it all on execution. Ultimately that falls on the responsibility of the coaches. Coaches have to coach the players to execute. But I think there's a large part of that. You can look at all the self-imposed, the self-imposed penalties, the self-inflicted wounds, the things that Pitt's offense did to hold itself back, whether it was procedure penalties, dropped passes, fumbles, turnovers, fumbles either recovered or lost, interceptions. You can look at those things and say, you held yourself back. Nobody called a play where the receiver or the tight end dropped a pass. Nobody called a play where this guy lined up wrong or this guy jumped before the snap. Now, again, some of that's going to be on the coordinator. Some of that's going to be on the coaches, that they've got to coach guys better. But I can't put that all on the coaches. Ultimately the accountability does fall on them. The buck stops here type of stuff. But guys got to play better too. Guys have to execute. Guys have to be smart. Guys have to focus, which is something that you could apply to a lot of elements of this team over the past couple of years. But guys have to focus. Don't jump before the snap. Make sure if you're on the ball or off the ball, you're supposed to be. Make sure you're lined up properly. Make sure you're not in motion when the ball is snapped. These are basic things. Hold on to the ball. Catch the ball. And again, that's not all on the receivers and tight ends. Not all the passes are thrown perfectly. But you got to do a better job. You have to execute better. And then coordinators look much smarter. I always think about Anthony Tennyson says Mark Whipple's not a great play caller because he's too predictable. If you say so, man. I don't know. I'm not smart enough to look at watch a football game and say, oh, I could have seen that. I knew they were going to try and run a post route there or a seam or a comeback or this or that. I don't know. I don't know if he's predictable or not. There are times when it works, and there are times when it doesn't. And the issues that I can see, the things that jump out to me, are when guys take false starts, procedure penalties, drop passes, fumble the ball. And that, to me, holds the offense back. Now, there have been times where they'll try and run a play, and I'll be like, what are you doing? Why would you do that? It doesn't make any sense. But, I'm not, you never know how it's supposed to be, how is the play drawn up? You never know how it's supposed to be run. You never know how it's supposed to be executed. So, but I do know you're not supposed to drop the ball when you're holding it and you're running. I know you're not supposed to, I know that when the ball hits you in the hands or hits you in the chest, you're supposed to catch it, particularly if you're standing on the far side of the sticks. I do know that if you're throwing a pass and there's a linebacker between you and the wide receiver, you either need to throw it over the linebacker or to someone else. I mean, these are basic things. I do know that if I'm lined up waiting and I'm watching the ball or listening to the cadence, I don't go until the ball is snapped. I can figure those out. An idiot like me can understand that. And I think that stuff has held the offense back. What was that number I threw out? I think of the 2019 season where they averaged like 8 self-inflicted self-inflicted wounds per game. Just the lack of focus, mistakes. 8 times a game of drop passes and fumbles and interceptions and procedure penalties. Not a ticky-tacky holding or offensive pass interference or anything like that. Just procedure penalties. Basic, simple. You did that. You didn't do that. 8 times a game. You're not calling plays to have those kinds of mistakes 8 times a game. I can't put that on the coordinator. But here we are. We're off. We're off on a tangent. We are digressing a lot. So let me scroll down here. Josh Newark asked, did you see the Texas wide receiver recruit, Che Nwabuko? Do you see him serving as a Quadri Henderson type player that plays in the slot but returns kicks and punts as well? Yeah, I would get the ball to Che as much as possible. He's got speed. You never want to talk about like Madden football and pretend like you have an idea about real football. But there's something I always would do in Madden, and I think it makes sense in real football as well. All right? I would always take my fastest guy and put him on returns. Because the thing about returns is it's more about those other 10 guys and what they do, and if they execute properly in how they block. If I'm a special teams coordinator, I'm spending all my time setting up those blocking schemes, and then I'm finding my fastest guy, the guy who can run straight forward the fastest. Because if my blocking schemes work, if my guys execute in the blocking, my guy who can run the fastest is going to get those holes and go. I want the guy who can, I want 2 things to happen. I want the blocking schemes to work, to create a hole for the returner. And when the returner gets through that hole, I want him to have the speed that nobody's going to catch him. Speed is the number one thing to me for return duties and ball security. Moves and, vision, I guess, but I want it set up in a very rudimentary, fundamental level. I want a blocking scheme. I want to execute that blocking scheme. And I want a guy who, when the blocks are executed, is not going to get caught. So I'm taking my fastest guy, who's not going to lose the ball, who I can trust to catch the ball, make good decisions with the ball as far as when to, take a knee on a touchback or a fair catch and all that kind of thing. The guy I can trust to make good decisions, who's going to catch the ball and can run like hell. That's the guy I want on the return teams. And Che is going to be the fastest guy on the team when he gets to Pitt. I'm pretty sure. He's like the fastest guy in the state of Texas. So I'm pretty sure he's going to be the fastest guy on the roster. In which case, I'm putting the ball in his hands as often as I can in as many different ways as I can, including punting and kicking. Now, that operates on the assumption, perhaps false, presumption, perhaps false, that anybody actually returns kicks or punts anymore. Kickoff returns are virtually dead. Punt returns are really tough because punters have gotten really good. So it may be a moot point, but yeah, he's the guy I would put back there on the returns. All right, I think we're right up on our hour here. I thank everybody who joined in. This was a lot of fun tonight. We had a great conversation. It's always fun to do. If you're listening to the podcast through the week, come join us on a Tuesday night, 8:30 p.m. every week, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I mean, you hear me reading all the comments and questions from all the guys who chime in. It's, Kevin Plouch just show up. Good to see Kevin, one of our biggest fans. You could be a super chatter like Michael B jumping in with his comments and questions. I mean, this is the fun. We can have a little back and forth, a little interaction. Hopefully someday we'll have our Panthers Insider Show on Saturday mornings on 93.7 The Fan, and we'll take calls, and you guys can call in, and we'll talk back and forth, have an actual conversation. But until then, this is the best we got, and I think it's pretty good because we have a lot of fun with these conversations. So, thanks to everybody who joined in. Thanks to everybody who listens to the podcast through the week. Make sure you check out the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Football, basketball, recruiting. You can find it all at Panther-Lair.com. And of course, like I say, message boards, where these conversations we're having here for 1 hour on a Tuesday night, we do that all day, every day. Panther-Lair.com. This quarterback conversation we just had, we're having that on the message boards right now. I'm going to log off this live stream, and I'm going to go jump in the thread about quarterbacks because I got a few more thoughts that I came up with during this podcast. So actually, I'm going to do a couple recruiting interviews because as we were taping this podcast, I got a text from somebody I've been trying to track down for an interview. So I'm going to get off the live stream. I'm going to jump on the old cell phone and do a couple interviews and get that wrapped up and get some content ready for Wednesday. But thanks again for tuning in. Really appreciate it. Had a great time. And we'll see you next week, Tuesday night, 8:30 p.m. for next week's Panther-Lair Show. So thanks again. Have a great week. We'll talk to you next Tuesday.